Today I'm driving a sort of new RS6 Performance. Now the RS6 for a very long time has held the mantle of being the default choice if you want a very fast and very practical car. These days, however, people are increasingly moving towards SUVs, crossovers, that kind of thing. So even the humble estate is having its sales numbers eaten into by these big old behemoths. I've just come off of a press event with Audi where I drove the brand new SQ7. In some ways, very much a competitor for this kind of car's customer. The SQ7 is a great big, massive, huge thing with, granted, not as much power as this, but actually more torque and the promise of untold luxury. And in fact, the price of the SQ7 is even worryingly similar to this as well. That being about £100,000 and list price on this car being, well, just over. As a used purchase, you can pick up one of these from around about 60 grand or so, depending on spec, trim, everything else. This car is particularly well specified, having the dynamic package that brings a few extra goodies, but today I'm not really going to get into the nitty-gritty, the details, the specifics of it, because to be honest, that will have already been covered elsewhere online. Today I want to talk about how this car drives and whether it is a potential future car for me. No, I'm not one of these YouTuber types that's going to drive a load of different cars and say whether it's sort of, possibly one for me or not, but in theory this is a car that one day I could own. It's presently beyond my budget, but eventually it is the sort of thing I could have. It is also a car that came at a fairly important point in time. It's pretty much one of the last of the cars to be unaffected by the fairly brutal WLTP rules. That means that even as standard, it still sounds fairly fruity and it should perform quite well. One of the big issues I've had with some recent cars is the fact that they seem to be getting quite laggy, and I don't think that's the fault of the engines. I think that's simply what's being done to them to make them pass these incredibly strict emissions tests. In terms of firepower, this car is certainly not lacking, having over 600 horsepower and about 550 pound-foot of torque. The RS6 is a sort of car that should have always appealed to me, but the previous generations always slightly missed the boat for me. The C5 generation, because it had a reputation for braking frequently and in a very expensive fashion, particularly because it was saddled with an auto box that wasn't perhaps quite up to the task. The generation that followed, with the 5-litre twin-turbocharged V10, was a bit of a curio, but very big, very heavy car, and I always sort of looked at the numbers and thought, it's just not quite for me. Historically, I was always more of a sort of BMW person. However, of late I have had something of an awakening and I've been warming to an awful lot of Audi's products. One that I didn't really like was the RS4. Now, if you're wondering where my review of that went, well, I never actually filmed one, but I did get to drive one very briefly. If someone out there's got one and is willing to let me review it, I'd love to, but I'll tell you now briefly what I thought was wrong with that car. First off, it was a very, very nice place to be, lovely interior, all that jazz. However, it was still very, very heavy, which is something you'd expect of an RS6, but not so much of the 4. And the big issue was the engine. That V6 turbo just has nowhere near the character of the old naturally aspirated V8. It doesn't, of course, rev anywhere close to it, and in fact it revs so low that it does really get in the way of things. The gearbox just didn't feel right on the car that I drove, and it really did, well, get in the way of your enjoyment. So I came away rather disappointed because I love the look of it and I love the interior and the styling and everything else and the idea of it, but it just didn't suit me. This RS6 is a pretty mean looking thing. Now, Audi have just announced the brand new RS6, which is probably going to be out next year, but that again is a car that's going to be saddled with a lot of issues thanks to WLTP. Not Audi's fault, everybody's having to deal with it. being an RS6, it has to, of course, be a nice place to sit in. And it really, really is. Plenty of decent, high-quality leather everywhere, although not as many places as it could be. There seems to be a common thing with Audi. For a car with a six-figure price tag, I think I would like to see a bit more leather on the tops here and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure you can probably option that, but from my perspective, that should not be an option. The dash here is very nice to use, and again, a little bit old school. I've absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the new car will be equipped with the virtual cockpit, and this one is the slightly more old-fashioned arrangement of two real dials with a central digital display. Doesn't feel out of date at all, and I think it's actually a very nice setup indeed. What I also very much love is the fact that you can make the central display disappear. I have a real pet hate for big old displays tacked onto the middle of the console here. It's a blight upon modern car design. But doing this just makes life easier. A press of a button and away it goes, which is also going to be quite important for when I'm able to afford one of these cars in about 10 years and all of this stuff is hilariously out of date, because you'll be able to tuck it away in the cupboard with the press of a button. The car is equipped with all the goodies you'd expect, a Bose sound system, all that sort of jazz. This car has a raised speed limiter as part of the dynamics package, meaning you can go to about 190 miles an hour before the electronic overlords kick in. This car has been to Germany, and I am assured that it is an absolutely perfect Autobahn stormer. I can very much believe that. It is a big old car, and it is the sort of category of car that you would expect to maybe have a little sense of disconnection about it. But actually, it doesn't. Even driving it around town, the steering feels very, very nice. I'd even maybe go so far as to say it might feel a bit nicer than that in the R8. Of course, the car is equipped with Quattro. It's a fast Audi, why wouldn't it be? I'm currently driving the car in individual mode, which has got most things set to sporty, except the suspension, which is set to comfort. Because as with most of these things, if you set it to sporty, it just ruins things. There's quite a few pops and bangs coming out the back, as you can probably hear. Maybe a few too many for my liking, but again, you can adjust that. I guarantee you that on the new car, those will be but a distant memory. When you're poodling through town and it's not making comedy noises out the back, it's actually pretty refined, pretty quiet, and gives you time to enjoy this lovely interior. I love the steering wheel. This is something, again, that Audi seem to be just getting right as a matter of course at the moment, and I'm really fond of the carbon fibre here, which has a bit of a blue tint in it, and if you weren't aware, that is a direct nod to the original RS car, the RS2. And you can actually see a reasonable amount of bonnet in this car, which is quite nice and not always guaranteed, and actually you sit pretty much right in it. The dash is at the height I want it to be, and these seats are quite figure-hugging. Very nice to look at too, and I also appreciate the fact that there is the odd splash of colour in here, courtesy of the blue stitching. There's plenty of room in the back for people, and there is shed loads of room in the boot. Using the traditional German measurement, one can fit at least 150 litres of beer in it. And let's see how she performs on my favourite test road. Response is incredible. Having just come out those SQ cars, and I am not joking, please go watch the review of that if you haven't seen it already, you are getting up to 3 seconds of lag in the new cars. This one, I mean, if it's there, I can't tell, and I'm really anti-turbo cars. If you haven't seen the channel before, I generally don't like turbos because I keep getting people telling me how, oh, this one's great, it's got no lag, and you drive it and there's lag everywhere. The new 992 is the same. This thing is a rocket ship. It's so fast it can keep up with a silver van. And anybody that's driven the B roads of Britain will know that that is basically Sebastian Vettel up there on a good day. As you pick up the speed, the suspension becomes pretty compliant. Again, it's a firm thing, and that's a necessary evil because this is a big old mass to contain. He's pedaling that thing. Now, steering is a little on the slow side, but then I have been spoiled with a few fairly fast racks recently. It's more, say, like my 7 Series than my S2000 in that regard. But you can place it actually reasonably well. It's not stupidly loud in here, but it makes a very nice noise. And it's just that engine's just got so much punch. It's so flexible. Gearbox in here actually works pretty well too. Even from low RPM, it just pulls and pulls hard. Yep, downshifts well, upshifts well, very nice. It's a very sad thing driving this and realizing that it is very much the last of its kind. And many of the new rules that are coming in now are very necessary. We need to improve the way that our cars are built. We need to improve emissions. We do need to consider the environment a little bit more. I joke about it on occasion, but it is something that needs to be taken seriously. However, there are things that have happened which I think are almost a byproduct, which are very wrong and in their own way equally dangerous. It's simple things like pulling out at a junction in one of the modern cars is actually very difficult because they're so laggy, they're so blunted. And that is dangerous. I mean, fun doesn't come into that. That is simply not safe. When you buy a car like this, you expect it to have performance, and performance when you want it. This one does. And really, honestly, if you asked me to draw up a list of faults with this car, I'd have very few. I have driven a great number of brilliant cars down this road. The brakes work pretty well. They aren't carbon ceramics on this one. And I'm only bringing it out to about 5,000 RPM there, but that's enough. It's so quick. It disguises its mass very, very well. And actually, you know what? It does talk to you a little bit. It's similar to the R8. The steering doesn't have the most feedback, but the chassis actually got quite a bit. And you can hustle it in a way that you wouldn't really think you could a seriously big car. There's very, very few machines that I drive which would be equally at home on this road as they would on the Autobahn. The RS4 was a great, great disappointment and a big missed opportunity from Audi for me. The RS6 is fabulous. I want one. It's a hell of a thing. Thank you for watching, everyone. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.